Welcome to the Advent IM Risk and Business Podcast. This was recorded at the NSI Summit in Birmingham during March 2019. I'm Derek Willins, the Client Development Manager at Advent IM, and I had the pleasure of talking to Tony Porter, the Surveillance Camera Commissioner. Tony's surveillance camera strategy is now 2 years old and has several strands to it. Mike Gillespie from Advent IM has been working closely with Tony to ensure cybersecurity is included throughout the strategy. Hello, we're with Tony Porter this morning and the Surveillance Camera Commissioner, and we are now 2 years into the surveillance camera strategy. And Tony, we have a great opportunity now to listen to how you feel about how things have gone so far.
Yeah, okay, and it's great to have the opportunity to talk to you and the listeners and spread the message, if you will. It's 2 years ago this week, actually, that I launched the National Surveillance Camera Strategy, and people often say why, and the one thing I say is when I first saw the industry, the video surveillance industry, apart from the energy and the direction from the commercial side, which was ever present, I could see a disconnect. I could see a disconnect between regulators, commercial manufacturers, end users. And you'll be familiar with a phrase that I used that a hero of mine, Glenn Fry from the Eagles, once said, "Good things happen when you get people together." Yeah. And that really did turn a light on for me. And I thought, if we had the opportunity to bring all the components together, I could actually develop a strategy that was harmonious, that worked with each other. So those strands with the national strategy are extremely important. And I'm sure during the course of this podcast, we'll talk about what they are and how they work. Yes. But what I would like to stress is this, that it's only 2 years old. And my commitment and ambition for that strategy is to have a longevity. And I hope whoever takes over my role as commissioner will be able to turn around and think, actually, the first guy did a pretty good job in bringing this together, and I hope he or she takes it to the next level.
And thanks very much, Tony. And just chatting earlier, I heard you talk about how your appointment was quite good in terms of timing, because a lot of things happened not long after you took the role on, technologically speaking. Yeah. Can you give us some thoughts on how technology is changing surveillance and what people need to think about?
Sure. I took over in 2014 and people then were talking about, end users particularly, CCTV, analog, getting a bit old, would government replace? And while surveillance still had a resonance with civil libertarian groups, it wasn't as invasive as it is now, or as if people dared believe it could be. What we have now that we didn't have 4 years ago is body-worn cameras held by every police service in the UK. We've got drones operating across police, fire, local authorities, roofers, council workers, universities. We've got facial recognition technology that is so more invasive than any other form, whereas hitherto a CCTV would capture your face, facial recognition would process the data of your face. And that is significantly different. And these have presented new challenges to government, regulators, end users, but particularly those organisations that are buying, manufacturing and trying to sell to market.
Okay. I understand you had a case at a shopping centre in Manchester regarding facial recognition. Maybe you could just give us a couple of minutes on that.
Sure. It came out, it was actually the Trafford Centre and Greater Manchester Police that worked in partnership. And because of the involvement of the police, which attracted my regulatory interests, I engaged with the lawyers and the senior operators from the police and the Trafford Centre. And I asked them a question. And the question I asked was this: is it proportionate to digitally process the faces of 18 million people to have the potential benefit of identifying 10, 15 or 20 missing from homes? And the answer from both parties was overwhelmingly not. Now, I don't have a power to sanction, to investigate or prosecute. But as Lord Justice Igor Judge once said to me, but you do have the potential to embarrass. And embarrassing a large public sector organisation in such a way is nothing wanted by anybody, a chief constable or a chief exec. So great testimony to both organisations. They stepped back. I believe it was probably the first regulatory intervention in relation to the use of facial recognition. But actually, I think it gave support to the public, recognising that there were mechanisms to protect them from unwarranted surveillance.
Absolutely, which is what it's all about.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe you can tell us about the strands that you mentioned earlier on Tony, within the strategy that have come together over the last couple of years and will go forward.
Sure.
Just give us the highlights of the key ones in that, of those strands.
Yeah. Well, I suppose the challenge to your listeners is if you were looking to bring a harmonised whole system approach, who would you have in? Right. And I say that because somebody might listen and think we've forgotten something. So this is a challenge. Come to us and let us know if that's the case. But yes, we looked at who uses surveillance. So the police and local authorities and the whole plethora of business and commercial. So we've incorporated the end users as a key strand. But then we went from cradle to judgment with the whole area of surveillance. So from cradle, the birth, manufacturers, they build things. Installers, consultants, they actually act as the middle person, the integrators. We then looked at other broader issues such as citizens' engagement, human rights, technology, data, regulation, and we identified we now have 11 core strands led by 11 industry experts that are working cross-piece, including, I have to say, Mike Gillespie, who, whilst he doesn't have his own strand, Mike works right across all the national surveillance camera strand leads and advises on the issue of cyber security and protection and so on and so forth. And I'll talk about that a bit more in a bit.
Yeah, that's good. So, I mean, so you've been obviously very active with partnerships by the sound of it, and Mike and the cyber element is obviously a key part of everything that you're looking at, because that connects the strands, is what you're saying. How do you see that changing or altering your thinking going forward over the next 2 or 3 years? I know, for instance, you were talking about some new legislation potentially coming out this year regarding surveillance.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because to an extent, looking where I am at the moment, it's almost like being a sentinel in the mist. And I mean that by saying technology is moving forward rapidly. Right. Nobody really knows how it's going to look in 2 years. So legislators will be reluctant to legislate now.
Yes.
So what we need to do is ensure that we have standards that are flexible and can manage against new data. We need to ensure that the programs that we're developing in terms of self-assessment are recognised and that become recognised in the industry. And my ambition, if I may, most people will be aware of the emblem and the badge that we have for the surveillance camera code of practice and compliance. I want people to recognise that, from manufacturers, installers, consultants to end users. And that's the ambition. And that really is the challenge I've given to Mike in the first instance.
Right. Yeah, well, that's a good ambition to have. And I think, can you give us an indication of how it's being recognised in the industry? Are people going for it? Are they showing interest, enough interest in your view?
Yeah, we so with Mike's leadership and direction, we have some of the largest manufacturers of video surveillance that are currently engaged on developing this program for us. We believe that once this standard has been identified and agreed, we will consult upon nationally. Where I think the trick is that the buyer's toolkit that we launched last year will signpost your purchaser to those manufacturers that have demonstrably shown that they have acquired the standard that we have declared as being important for the whole cyber business. Now, if we can achieve that, I believe we will have more and more of the large manufacturers thinking, well, the power of the pound is very, very powerful. If we can demonstrate the power of the pound to purchases, will drive manufacturers to comply, then actually all we're doing is driving standards up for cyber compliance, and people will have more reassurance that the cyber has been addressed and is working.
Brilliant. So where can people get this toolkit then, Tony?
Okay, the toolkit is extremely important, because the toolkit really brings together the new legislation, the data protection issues that were introduced in May 2018. If they access my website, surveillancecamera.gov.uk, then they will be able to download the buyer's toolkit. That will demonstrate how to purchase safely. They'll also be able to download the self-assessment tool, which is a superb and very easy to comply document that will demonstrate compliance to my code under the Protection of Freedoms and the Data Protection Act. But actually, more importantly, the Data Protection Impact Assessment, which is now a requirement under GDPR and the Data Protection Act, we have developed in collaboration with the Information Commissioner's Office. And it's a fantastic tool that covers all bases. And the question I'd ask is, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you use that?
Yeah, makes sense. Well, okay, well, hopefully that will continue to progress. And you were mentioning earlier, Tony, some of the other things which are changing in your world, how other government areas are showing much more interest in the work you're doing, and the Ministry of Justice and the legal profession, for instance, are now knocking on your door, talking to you about some of your work and how it can be used within the legal process. Could you give us some insight into that, for example?
Certainly. So I guess importantly, if you look at those organisations that must comply with my code, we're talking about the police, local authorities, and so on and so forth. The requirement is to demonstrate compliance, and if you don't demonstrate compliance, then it's something that the Crown Prosecution Service can take into account. Now, this is something that most police forces and local authorities would be very concerned about, and they now wish to comply with the code. Other areas where we've been involved is there's a nexus between overt use and covert use, and we've been engaged with the Investigative Powers Tribunal to advise in relation to those issues. And also, as things move forward in terms of the use of new and modern technology, my code, which actually says will now and in the future regulate advancing technology, is going to become more and more important. Hence, the work that Mike Gillespie from Advent is doing for me is so important, because it's important that people can demonstrate compliance so that they don't lose cases in a court of law.
Absolutely, that's exactly what struck a chord with me when I listened to you speaking earlier on. The whole area of standards is something which, this industry, from my perspective, has been pretty well under-regulated and had loose standards over many years, but it's great to hear it's coming together.
Sure.
And if the legal profession and the justice system is getting interested in standards, and that surely must help your cause, and the players inside will hopefully adopt better techniques, better standards going forward.
I think so. And actually, the call out here is increasingly, as technology becomes more sophisticated, the threat of invasion of privacy is significantly higher.
Yes.
And therefore the threat to organisations that they breach that is significantly higher. So the challenge is, why would you not do what is required, particularly if we have given you a roadmap, an A to Z, that is not rocket science. And if that can be brought to bear, all companies that are involved in this industry need to know that if they can download the relevant tools, they can ensure that their customers are aware of the code. The code incorporates compliance to the Data Protection Act. They should be approaching the end user who's purchasing, saying, this is a good place to be. We can support you in getting there. It will not only protect your assets through being able to protect against hacking or any other form of invasion, but more importantly, they're able to evidence compliance with the code and what is expected of them.
Excellent. Okay, no excuses then.
No excuses. No, we've done as much as we can.
Okay. Tony, look, thanks very much for coming along and giving us your time. Very interesting talk, and it's great to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you
much.
too. Thanks
Cheers,
very much
Tony.
indeed.